Good morning. Today is Thursday, March 21st, 2024. In Megillas Esther, the book of Esther that we read on Purim, there are three different terms used for Achashverosh. Sometimes he's called Achashverosh, that's his name. Sometimes he's called Hamelech Achashverosh, King Achashverosh, that's his title. And sometimes he's referred to just as Hamelech, the king. Our sages tell us that when we read the word Hamelech, the king, by itself, that word also refers to Melech Ha'olam, the king of the universe, the Almighty. It refers to God. In other words, the book of Esther is actually two parallel stories. One layer of the story is about Achashverosh and the people and what happened. And the other layer is about God. It is an allegory. It is a hidden story to be able to see God's presence. God's name is not mentioned in the Megillah. The word God in any form is not mentioned in the Megillah. But what the Megillah emphasizes is God's hidden presence throughout. The theme of Purim is to look below the surface, beneath the surface, to see God's hidden presence in everything. That's the reason there's a custom to wear masks and to wear costumes, to show that what is on the surface, what is visible, is often very different than the inner reality. And we are trying, on Purim especially, to see that inner reality, to see the allegorical story which is hidden from the literal text, but alluded to in this way whenever the word Hamelech by itself is used. And this second layer is a completely different way of reading the Megillah. And I invite you to read it with this in mind on Purim, to listen to it this Purim with this in mind. It's a very different story. Just like shiurim, the Song of Songs written by Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, is an allegory about our relationship with God, so too, Megillas Esther, on this level, is an allegory about our relationship with God, and it is just as applicable today as it was then, as it describes our relationship in Golus, our relationship in exile, and especially today, what we are going through. It describes the relationship that we have with God, which is much more complicated now than it was at certain points in Shir HaShirim. Let me demonstrate this layer with one passage. It is a passage that seems kind of minor. It's often overlooked. But with this lens, with this way of looking at the story, it takes on great significance, especially for us today. So, just a bit about the background and introduction before we get to the passage that I want to look at. So Haman convinces Achashverosh that there should be a decree against the Jews to wipe out all the Jews, God forbid. Mordechai finds out, gets a message to Esther, wants Esther to do something. Esther asks Mordechai what should she do. Mordechai sends a message she should go to Achashverosh and plead for her life and the life of her people. Then the Megillah says as follows. Esther replies, Kol avdei HaMelech, all of the servants of the king, HaMelech, Va'amridos HaMelech, and all the nations of the king, Yodim, they know. Asher kol ish v'isha asher yavo el hamelech, that any man or woman who approaches the king, asher lo yikareh, that has not been invited to approach, achaz daso lahamis, they're executed, they're killed. Levad me'asher yoshit lo hamelech esharbit hazahav v'chaya, except for if there would be an exception where the king would put out his scepter, indicating that he agrees to meet. But va'ani lo nikresi levo hamelech zeh shloshim yom, I have not been called for over 30 days. So there's no way that I can go and approach the king. Now, on the level of the simple reading of the Megillah, Hamelech refers to Achashverosh. We seem to be learning about a person that has a paranoia, right? Nobody can come in to see him. And if somebody comes in to see him, and he's got all of his guards and advisors around him, obviously, but if anybody tries to approach to speak to the king without being invited, they get killed. I mean, that's a little bit of a crazy person. But let's look at it on the deeper layer, where the word Hamelech refers to God. What Esther is saying, she's reflecting on our relationship with God at that time. And what she says is very, very sharp, very, very harsh, and very difficult. She says, God is removed from us. God is uninterested in us. Otherwise, how could it be that a person like Haman could convince Achashverosh to have a decree to wipe out the entire Jewish people? And Esther reflects in these words to Mordechai, I think, the feeling of many people, many Jews, especially at certain times in the lives of each of one of us, and certain times like now in the life of the Jewish people. I think that many of us can relate to Esther's feeling. Everyone knows that God forbid, you can't approach him. He doesn't want to talk to us. He hasn't called us. He's not interested. I know from time to time those thoughts afflict me. And I think that this is one of the deepest questions a thinking religious Jew will encounter. What if God doesn't want to connect with me or with us? Va'ani lo nikresi levo el hamelech. I haven't been called by the king. King's not looking for me. And if I tried to approach, it would not be a positive response. That's the first passage. But the crucial point is that Esther is wrong. So this is the passage that I want to discuss with you. It's the beginning of Perek Hey, beginning of chapter 5. And again, when we read it on the simple level, it seems like a very minor passage. And also, you'll notice, as I read it, it's very repetitive. It seems like a lot of words are repeated more frequently than they need to be. But let's listen to it with two ears, on the level of the simple meaning of the text and on the level of understanding that this is about our relationship with God, because this is a response to what Esther charges. Vatama b'chatzar beis hamelech hapnimis Esther dresses herself in the garb of royalty, and she stands in the courtyard, the inner courtyard of the king, Hamelech. Notice how many times this word Hamelech by itself is going to be repeated. Nochach Beis Hamelech, again, in front of the place of the king. V'Hamelech, again, the king, Yoshev al Kisei Malchuso Bebeis Hamalchus, Nochach Pesach Habayis, and the king is sitting on his royal throne, facing the entrance. That's critical. Vayihi Chiros Hamelech es Esther Hamalka, and it was when the king, Hamelech, sees Esther, Omeres Bechatzer, standing in the courtyard. Nasa chen be'inav, she found favor in his eyes. V'yoshet Hamelech le'Esther, and the Melech, the king, reaches out his scepter to indicate that he wants her to approach. Vatikrav Esther, and Esther comes close. Vayomer Hamelech, and the king, Hamelech, again, says to her, Malach Esther Amalka, Uma bakashaseich, ad chatzi malchus v'yinasin lach. Just tell me what you want, and I will do it. All you have to do is tell me. And the answer is yes. On the level where this is referring to Achashverosh, okay, it's just part of this kind of strange, erratic behavior. It keeps repeating this word, Hamelech, over and over and over again, much more than the text demands. But let's read it where Hamelech refers to God. And this is God's response to correct Esther. Esther had an understanding, an idea of what the relationship with God was at that time. And God is going to respond and say, you are mistaken. Because what Hamelech says, what God says, is not what Esther anticipates God will say. God says, please come. I'm waiting, watching the door, waiting for you to come. I want you to come close. Please ask. Just ask for whatever you want. I will help you. I want to assist you. I want to support you. I'm listening to you. I'm waiting for you. And if sometimes it seems like that is not true, if sometimes it seems the opposite of that, it's only because you are so far away. It's only because you are only looking at the surface. You're not looking at the inner reality. The inner reality is God says, I am always here, visible or not. I'm always listening, whether you recognize it or not. I always want to help you, whether you feel it or not. And if at any time you don't feel that closeness from me, you don't feel that love from me, you don't feel that support from me, it's because you're too far away from me, not the opposite. The underlying theme of Purim is that Purim is at the crossroads of Jewish history. Just after the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash, the first temple in Jerusalem. It happened at a time when many thought the relationship with God was over. God's house was destroyed. Jerusalem was destroyed. The Jewish people were exiled. It's over. Fine. Jewish history ended. But they were wrong. Purim is the crossroads. It is the pivot where we see as a people that no, it's not over. After the first exile, we will come back to Israel. There'll be a second Beis Hamikdash. It's going to be a new era. It's not going to be exactly the same. There'll be different guidelines. There will be a time of Hester Panim, where God's face is hidden. The Talmud says, where is a hint to the word Esther, the name Esther in the Torah? Hester Panim, where God says, at certain times I will hide my face, but silence is not absence. And so what Purim means, the underlying theme, is that if you thought that the relationship with God was over with the destruction of the temple, or in your own life, or in the life of the Jewish people, you think something happened and it's over, forget it, God's not listening, God's not interested, God's not helping. If you ever thought that, you're wrong. It's not true. It's never true. It will never be true. And that's what it means to every one of us as an individual when we read the story on Purim and absorb this narrative, what it means for me to know that although, yes, I do have my doubts and I do have my questions and I have moments where I'm not sure. But Purim, reading the Megillah, Hamelech, 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 reassures me that I'm the one who's mistaken. God's love is there. God's presence is there, even if silent. God wants us. God asks us to come close. God is waiting for our overture. God is just waiting for us to ask. And whenever it seems that that is not true, it is we who are mistaken. Because ultimately, Purim teaches us things are not always what they seem. So I want to share with you a story. I heard this story from Rabbi Biederman, Rabbi Meilech Biederman. It's so magnificent. It is so applicable to our lives, especially today with what's going on in Israel, for Jews around the world. And it is so connected to the theme of the unreality of Purim. This is a story Rabbi Biederman heard many years ago, and it's a story he repeats often. Now, he was told this story by a rabbi in Israel, a well-respected, elderly man, a man with many, many children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, Baruch Hashem, thank God, more than 100 descendants this great man in Israel had. They should all live and be well. He had grandchildren and great-grandchildren in every part of Israel. Wherever he went in Israel, he had grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And he once told Rabbi Biederman the following. He said, you see all of these children of mine, all these descendants, grandchildren, great-grandchildren spread all over Israel, this beautiful, beautiful family, Baruch Hashem, that I have. Every single one of them, it's all because of one incident that happened. What happened? Many years ago, 2 weeks after his wedding, his mother-in-law calls him. And his mother-in-law summons him to her home, just the two of them. There, some type of dispute developed, and she started screaming at him and cursing him and insulting him. I mean, it was over nothing. And try to imagine what this young man at that time felt like experiencing this just 2 weeks after his wedding. I mean, how do you go on after this? Your mother-in-law is yelling and screaming and cursing. I mean, how do you continue? This could affect the rest of his life. So this young man went directly to his rabbi, Reb Elia Roth, of blessed memory, a very wise and sensitive scholar, This young man went directly from the mother-in-law's house and this bizarre, so upsetting, life-changing experience. He went to Rebellia and he told him what happened. Rebellia said to him, does anyone else know about this? And the young man said, no, I came directly to you. It was only the two of us in the house. I didn't tell anybody. No one else knows. Are you sure that no one else knows? He asked. Yes, I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell my wife. I just came straight to you. No one else knows. Rebellia said to him, listen to me carefully. It was a dream. Decide in your mind it was a dream. It did not actually happen. So, all these years later, this now elderly man says to Rabbi Biederman, I listened to my rabbi. I decided in my mind it was a dream. It did not happen. I decided I wouldn't speak about it. I wouldn't think about it. Who dwells on a dream like that? It was a nightmare. It's not reality. In our dreams, we dream all kinds of crazy things. Okay, now, please listen carefully to the next part of the story. I'm back to when Rebellia gave him this advice to this now young man. 2 weeks later, his mother-in-law summoned him again. And this time when he arrived, his mother-in-law said, I'm so sorry. I apologize. The way I spoke to you, there was no reason for it. I asked for your forgiveness. And he said to his mother-in-law, forgiveness for what? She said, for screaming and insulting you 2 weeks ago when I told you to come to the house. He said to her, what are you talking about? She said, what? You forgot what happened just 2 weeks ago? You totally forgot the big blow up between you and me? And he said to her, maybe you had a bad dream. What dream? You don't remember? I was screaming and yelling at you. He said to her, don't you think I would remember something like that if it really happened? Don't you think I would have told my parents? I would have told my wife that you had done such a thing to me if that had really happened? And she said, the mother-in-law said, you know, I actually saw your mother the other day and we had a very pleasant conversation and she didn't mention anything about it. Could it really have been a dream, maybe? So this man, now, years later, concludes to Rabbi Biederman telling him the story. He says, I don't know if my mother-in-law was really convinced that it was just a dream. But I can tell you this. Had I not decided it was a dream, things would have turned out very differently for me. And all of these children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren that you see, all this beautiful family, over 100 descendants, all of that is because of this dream. It's because of the merit of deciding that what happened didn't happen. What's real? And what's not real. Often it's not what it seems. Often it's not up to us to. Often it is up to us to decide. And we should be very careful to decide wisely and not let others decide for us. My friends, I wish you a meaningful day today, Tainus Esther, and a day of Purim to come, tempered but joyful, and I look forward to seeing you soon in person.